Okay, yeah, I'm gonna today give a broad overview over my thesis, which is on understanding stakeholder involvement for responsible AI development and practice. Who I am, I'm Emma. I'm now in the 4th year of my PhD on exactly the topic of this talk, and I'm affiliated with the University of Cambridge and the Alan Turing Institute. My background is in psychology, HCI, and UX research, and there's like some places where I've worked before or that were part of my education. The content, so I'm kind of gonna start with some boring definitions just to clarify what I'm talking about. Say a little bit about my motivation, so how I found this research topic, my overarching research question, and then different substeps of this, like how I'm gonna answer it, and then a quick summary. And these are the substeps, but I'm going to explain them in more detail later. So when I talk about stakeholders in software development, I'm kind of using this ISO definition, which is individuals or organizations that are having a right, share, claim, or interest in a system or in its possession of characteristics that meet their needs and expectations. So you could also say they're like affected communities, which is often used as well. You can kind of cluster them in internal stakeholders, which are people that are part of developing the system, like engineers, UX researcher, or the legal team. They're not in focus of my research. I'm mainly talking about external stakeholders, which are the anticipated users of the system, affected communities that are not users. So for example, people where the system is making decisions about without these people ever interacting with the system. Then especially kind of groups of people that are at risk of being disadvantaged, for example, because of historical bias. But you could also say regulators or auditors are sort of external stakeholders. And throughout this presentation, I will use SHI for stakeholder involvement and RAI as for responsible AI, just as abbreviations. And if you have understanding questions, please just, I don't know, I think there's a chat or something. And if I don't see something, because I don't have two screens today, so if there is something in the chat that needs answering, just let me know. And broader questions, maybe let's keep them for the end. So how did I get to this topic? When I started my PhD around 3 years ago, all companies and a lot of governments were publishing these responsible AI principles, and it was quite obvious that they are not working so well. And they're not working out of sort of, or I kind of analyzed for myself that I feel they're not working because of 4 reasons. One is that they're very abstract, so like high level and ambiguous, and I mean, no one really knows what it means to build a transparent system, for example. Then they're often contradictory. So it's very difficult to really respect privacy, but also being fully transparent. So for example, you can't fully publish all the data that was used in developing a system if there is personal data. So sometimes some of these responsible AI principles contradict each other, but there isn't really guidance on how to prioritize these. And then they can also be in conflict with business interests. Then there isn't really kind of an internal responsibility on who's responsible. And it's also really difficult to make someone responsible for something so abstract, which is then related to the first challenge. And there's generally quite like more like a compliance mindset than an, oh, how do we build the most responsible systems? More like, how do we build not irresponsible systems, if that makes sense. And then 4th problem was that it was really difficult to kind of measure when a responsible AI principle was fulfilled or not. And looking at these, coming like from UX research and psychology, I felt, well, maybe let's use stakeholder involvement. So let's ask the people that will be affected by the system, kind of mediate what these kind of abstract principles mean for us. And so more concretely, I thought, well, instead of saying, oh, these principles are so abstract, I don't know what they mean, let's maybe ask the people that will be affected by the system what fairness or transparency what all these things mean for them in this context, which can also really help to make them way more concrete and make sure that the needs of the people that will be impacted by the system are better respected and understood. The same can help with the contradictory values, so to understand what would people recommend regarding these trade-offs or hierarchies of the different principles. Regarding the lack of internal advocacy, by making really clear to practitioners or like the people developing AI systems that, well, these are the consequences of the systems that you are developing, and this is what people's needs are in this context, and this is what people's fears are in this context. I hope that this feeling of responsibility can be instilled a little bit stronger. And regarding the last point, well, maybe we should ask the people that will be affected by it when a system is transparent enough or fair enough to be deployed. So to kind of hand over this, instead of saying, oh, I don't know how I should measure it, let's ask the people that will be in this context when they are fulfilled or not. Of course, this is all very abstract and quite broken down. And there's a journal article where I speak in a lot more detail about this. Happy to send the slides around later or something if you're interested. But yeah, these are, it's in a lot more detail here. But I just wanted to know this to say that, well, after I kind of thought about this, I really thought, well, we actually need stakeholder involvement to achieve more responsible systems. Which then led me to my research question, which is, how can we achieve more meaningful stakeholder involvement in the AI development practice? That is not, slide should start. Anyway, it doesn't matter, wait, I just get them all here. So I think that this research question has sort of 4 subcategories. One of them is, okay, to understand the goals and opportunities, like why is stakeholder involvement good in this context? Then the yellow circle to say, okay, what is happening right now and how useful is that to understand, to achieve these opportunities? Then the pink circle to say, what would we have to do instead to better achieve these opportunities? And then the turquoise or blue circle at the ground is kind of to bring the yellow and the pink closer together. So how can we kind of overcome these bottlenecks and change the status quo to be closer to these beneficial practices? And I will now kind of talk about my research under these 4 kind of pillars. So the first one, well, I kind of, in this analysis that I just showed, was kind of reflecting on the need of stakeholder involvement to overcome issues with responsible AI principles. But I also wanted to look at it more often, well, not just what I think is important, but more on what do other kind of big players in the space, why do they think that stakeholder involvement is important? And so I asked myself, which benefits do responsible AI organizations expect from stakeholder involvement? And then I did a systematic literature review of 26 organizations that put out guidance to guide the organizational practice in AI industry. From these 26 organizations, I found 56 documents. Then I did a keyword search across these to find paragraphs relevant to stakeholder involvement and did a thematic analysis. Here are some examples of these organizations. So it was both governmental organizations, but also intergovernmental organizations, like civil society organizations, and then also like research institutes and so on. And in this analysis, I found 5 key benefits. So 5 like really positive things that are associated with stakeholder involvement during responsible AI development. The first one is to rebalance decision power. So instead of kind of teams developing AI systems deciding by themselves what sort of systems we should build and how they should look like, the affected communities get some authority in this process. Then it can help to better understand the socio-technical context, including the needs of the people present in this context and generally who is actually present in this context. This is also connected to the third, the improved anticipation of potential risks. Then the fourth one was a better public understanding of the objective of a system and also increased trust, which can be both by being involved, you better understand the objective, but also by knowing that maybe a civil society organization in this space was involved, I trust the system more, even though I don't really know what they discussed. And then public scrutiny and monitoring, so that the public can intervene if they're not sure, if they feel a system is kind of operating as it should in a specific situation. So these 5 benefits seem amazing, but we don't really know whether the currently established practice is already geared towards harnessing these benefits. So then that was the second part of this study, where I'm now coming to this yellow bubble to understand, okay, what is happening right now regarding stakeholder involvement in the AI practice, and what are bottlenecks thereby? And this question, again, has 2 sub-questions. One is, okay, what's happening right now? And is what is happening right now useful to achieve these 5 benefits that I just analyzed? Looking at the first bit, I did a survey with 130 people that are developing AI, either in a technical role or product, UX, as in research or consultant, so like kind of broadly in a team developing AI systems. Asked them a lot of questions about who is involved, why, what's going well, what's not going so well, are you following best practices, what do you think are best practices, that's sort of the questions that were in the survey. And then I did semi-structured interviews with 10 of these people that filled out the survey, to like better understand kind of the background here. Yeah, and analyze this. There was some statistical analysis of the survey, but most of it was a thematic analysis of the interviews, but also open text entries. I'm only going to present like a very small subset of the findings, because otherwise this is going to explode the presentation. But so basically found that there are 3 categories of drivers behind stakeholder involvement. So 3 reasons why people in practice involve affected communities. The first and most dominant one, which are the blue bars, was to increase customer value. So to understand like needs and concerns from stakeholders, to ensure that the system fits the customer's expectations, so will be purchased, ensure high usability, so all around like this topic. Then the second category, I clustered around like these orange bars, which I called compliance and decreased legal risks. So this is like to follow guidelines, to meet legal requirements, to gather expert opinions on legal details, or required by our organizational process. And then the third category, which we can see is very low, so they could select as many as they wanted in the survey. And even though they could select all reasons, only 17%, for example, selected to understand actors in the application context, including power dynamics and inequalities, or to increase public trust, or to assign agency to the people that will be impacted. So we can kind of see that customer value was the most important one, then like legal compliance topics were medium, and kind of including and safeguarding the public was really not that important. And kind of this distribution of importance was also reflected in the methods and scope that the practitioners reported. So mainly involved stakeholders were typical end users, domain experts, and the internal legal team, which, yeah, is linked to commercial and legal interests. What was also interesting is who was not involved. So around 1/3 of the participants said that they expect that their system would affect the general public or affected non-users, but we can see that the general public was involved in 4% of the time and affected non-users in 11% of the time. So really not that much. And the main methods were prototype testing or usability testing, which you can really only do after you have a prototype. So that means that on the objective level, so to decide which problem are we solving, really the big questions, these kind of like value-laden questions in the beginning of the outset, they were really not in focus. Yeah, instead, people were involved for like small-scale changes, so around like usability and so on. So these findings, so in the second step, I related these findings now to these 5 benefits that we talked about earlier in like the previous bubble. What I did to do this is that I made a table where on the left side I put these 5 benefits that we discussed earlier, and then I related all these findings to them. We don't need to go through all of them. There are a lot more than I just talked about now. But then I derived something like an estimate of how much what I found in practice can actually help to achieve these 5 benefits. And as we can see, it goes from very low contribution for 2 of them to low contribution or medium contribution, but all of them with a limited scope, so only for a subset of the stakeholders. And to summarize this, I kind of found that stakeholder involvement that wasn't directly linked to commercial interests was not incentivized or conducted. And then even in the stakeholder involvement that happens, the stakeholders don't actually have enough decision authority or like influence is maybe a different way of saying this, that they can actually meaningfully influence how these systems are built. So they're involved, but they don't actually have any power in that process, or they don't even get enough insights to be able to provide this input that would be required. And the most named benefit, so this rebalancing of decision power, the first one I talked about earlier, that was basically named by all organizations, and that wasn't advanced at all by the current stakeholder involvement practices. So that means that the currently established practice contributes only very marginally to these responsible AI goals as put out by these organizations I analyzed in the previous part of the study. If you're interested in the details of this, I submitted this as a journal article right now to TOKAI, like the Transactions of Kai journal. Haven't heard back yet. Let's see. It always takes a while. Okay, quickly time check. Perfect. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about, okay, we understand now what would be the goals, what would we want to achieve, where do we currently stand, and now I have kind of a section on what would we have to do to achieve these goals. So again, I took these kind of 5 key benefits, and then I derived sort of, okay, what would we have to do to achieve each of them? And what is kind of the overarching theme here is that we need to shift in goals from just increasing usability and customer value towards these 5 themes. And to do this, we need to give a lot more decision authority and agency to the involved stakeholders, but also involve them at very different life cycle stages. So traditionally, if you look at this little AI lifecycle picture at the bottom right, I think traditionally stakeholders were involved a lot in maybe defining the system requirements, and then definitely in sort of like testing the system or helping to make it more so like usability tests, or to say, explain your workflow, and then we try to kind of put this in the system. But very rarely at the stages that I put orange here. So very rarely at saying, okay, what should be the system objective? Like, which problem are we solving? And is an AI system even the best solution to do this? Then deployment. Is this ready to be deployed? You will be affected by this. Would you say this is better than the system existing is better than the system not existing? And then also just generally post-deployment aspects. So it is deployed now, but if something isn't going as you want it to, you should be able to give feedback and change that. which of course comes to the increased scope point. So all affected communities need to be involved and not only revenue critical stakeholders, which has been the focus so far. And then in another study, I then thought, okay, if I'm now someone, I'm part of a team developing an AI system, which steps would I have to go through to do successful stakeholder involvement? And to kind of build this process framework, I looked at the process framework from healthcare, then adapted this to AI systems, and then spoke to different AI practitioners to understand which problems they're facing. And then I arrived at this, this process, which, so for each process I have the stage and then the challengers per stage, which are here. And yeah, I thought that was quite interesting because I feel in a lot of the literature and discussion, there are very different stages and focus than, or basically some stages that I found aren't really in focus of the current discussion, which are mainly these purple ones, I think, which I found through talking to practitioners. Maybe I quickly go through this because I think it's, yeah, maybe quite useful to think through this. So to do successful stakeholder involvement, at first you need to have an organizational attitude that allows you to do stakeholder involvement, so they recognize the value of it. Then they need to give you the resources that you need to do that. Then you need to be able to select the proper scope of stakeholder involvement, so to involve people early on, continuous, and not only revenue critical stakeholders. Also with this like decision authority that we already talked about. Then you need to have the know-how how to actually do this, which can be quite difficult, especially if we talk about vulnerable communities. Then you need to recruit a representative and inclusive sample, which is really not easy. Establish a shared knowledge base with them so that both sides have enough insights to really understand the other side. And this doesn't only mean that the involved stakeholders need to understand enough about AI systems, but this also means that the people developing the AI system understand aspects of the context for which they are developing, which can be as tricky, and which I think is often forgotten. Then during the point of involvement, there needs to be an effective communication with the stakeholder. Yeah, and then the insights that were collected need to be stored appropriately. So that also then the next step, the internal communication of insights, can be facilitated. So that basically not only the people that speak to the stakeholders know what the stakeholders said, but also the wider team, including like engineers and product designers and so on, understand the stakeholders' needs. Then the second to last step is to then say, okay, we learned that different stakeholders have different needs that are often in conflict. Then these needs are often in conflict with our commercial interests. And what do we do now? How do we prioritize this? Which seems to be a major challenge. Like a lot of the people involved said that if they were able to do everything quite well until then, that was still really challenging and meant that a lot of really valuable insights were lost because, yeah, there are a lot of egos involved, and it's not always easy to say, okay, let's slightly deprioritize our commercial interests. And then the last stage, so then already the impact on the system took place, but then after that, you should inform the stakeholders on the impact that their involvement had. So these are these stages. Quick run through, also the methods. I wasn't sure if I would have enough time to talk about them. So if you're interested, I think in around 2 weeks that should be published open source by the EAAMO conference. Yeah, have a look if you're interested. And then this kind of brings me to the last part, which is improving implementation on the ground. So basically, how can I now help practitioners to get through this a little bit easier? And this is kind of the open bit still in my PhD that I want to dedicate kind of the next 6 to 9 months to. So I currently think that a good way of doing this is to collaborate with one or several teams that are currently developing an AI system and are motivated to or already doing it, involving various affected communities. And then I would like to use this process framework that I just introduced to identify what of these stages are currently most pressing bottlenecks. And then for these kind of pressing problems right now, identify which support already exists. Because I feel in academia, there's already a lot of tools or guidance out there, not all just academia, some is also from non-academic bodies. But I don't know how much that there's basically a big lack of validative studies, but also I think some of these problems can't be solved by just more guidance. So yeah, see if there is already some of this support. And if there is support, I would like to try around 3 of them with the team and see what works and what doesn't work. And then derive recommendations on how these tools could be updated, or what else could be helpful. And if no support exists, then I think then either I would like to co-design a support or so like derive requirements, iterative prototyping and testing, or kind of analyze why maybe a tool like one of the ones that we have already a lot, like for example, these deck of cards or something to facilitate the communication with a stakeholder, why they maybe don't work in this context. So if you know interested teams, send them my way. Here's my email, but I'll also give that all later. So that's kind of the part of the journey that I'm trying to do right now. So quick summary. So at first I try to understand, okay, what can we achieve with stakeholder involvement? Why is that good? What's sort of the holy grail that we wanna harness here? Then the yellow circle was to understand, okay, what is happening right now in practice and what are current problems that people encounter. Then I wanted to analyze, okay, what are actually best practices? So how do can we perfectly achieve this like orange circle at the top? And then improve the implementation on the ground. So how can we bring the yellow circle closer to the pink circle to then achieve the orange circle? A bit many circles here. And in that journey, I kind of addressed these, but this one is sort of the open challenge I'm looking at right now. And if you have other ideas on how that could be done, very open to suggestions. I haven't really started this yet. I started this week to think about how I could do that. Needed to recover from a few deadlines. Thanks for listening. I hope that my goal to achieve more meaningful stakeholder involvement in the AI development practice, that I managed to contribute to that to some extent. So thanks for listening. Please ask questions.